Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side of podcasts.
Never let your struggles become your identity.
Hello, everybody. Welcome, or if this is your first time, welcome back. This is True Crime Connections, and I'm your host, Tiffany. Today, we are talking about no matter what your past has held, you can still recover and build a productive and happy life. With me today is Mary Beth O'Connor, who is a former federal judge who came from not what you would think a federal judge background would. So I want to thank you so much for being here and sharing your story.
Sure. I'm happy to be here. And I love that intro. You know, no matter where you are, you can have a happy and productive life. That's a big reason I tell, my junkie to judge story exactly for that reason.
Absolutely. I think so many times people think, oh, well, I did this, this, and this. And then they're limiting themselves because you just don't know who really cares about that stuff.
Well, and it's also that, like when I first got sober, it wasn't like my goal was eventually I'll become a judge. I mean, that was not even on my radar, right? And so it was really sort of about where am I and where do I need to start from? Like what realistically is my first steps? And so I do always encourage newcomers. It's nice to think about the long term to a degree. But the reality is in the first year or two of recovery, whether it's mental health recovery, which I also had, trauma recovery, substance recovery, you don't actually really know who you are, because you haven't been living as your true self. And so it can take time to sort of reconnect to yourself and then figure out sort of actually, what do I want my life to look like?
100%. When you're all medicated, really, you don't have a whole lot of thought processes going on other than finding your next fix. So exactly, you have no idea who you are or what potential you have.
That's right. And that's right. And I certainly had no confidence that I was going to be able to achieve much. I mean, I thought, well, if I'm sober, maybe things won't be as chaotic, as miserable, but that I can actually be as happy as I was able to be, as successful, and not just the job, because, a job is a job and I'm proud of that success, but, being a good wife and a good aunt and a good friend and a part of giving service to my community, all those other things. I really had no idea sort of how wonderful and how happy and how satisfying life could really be.
Right. Well, right. I mean, yeah, I think we all get in that time for mind frame from time to time, but I totally get it. So you say that you were kind of like in a 3-part recovery. So I don't know where in your journey you would like to start, if you want to go down the childhood path, which kind of led you to where you were.
Yeah, I mean, so the subtitle, so my memoir is From Junkie to Judge, but the subtitle is really key. One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction, because I did grow up in an abusive household, which is not uncommon precursor to developing a substance use disorder. There was a lot of domestic violence in my house, but also I suffered from physical violence, sexual violence, I had other sexual assaults. So all of that sort of pain and misery made drugs really attractive. And so I started using at 12. My first drug was alcohol, and it was Boone's Farm Strawberry Hill wine, which a lot of people know. And for me, what I noticed right away was how much better it made me feel. And so it seemed like a good idea at the time. It seemed like a good idea. And I quickly picked up weed, pills, acid. But by 16, I found my drug of choice, which was methamphetamine. And I was shooting meth within 6 months. And I didn't get sober until I was 32. I had a couple better years when I first went to college, but I couldn't sort of keep it at that, not good, but better level. And then the last 10 years until I was 32 were pure misery. So it was a really long haul in the sort of the misery of the consequences of the abuse and trauma and of my drug use being completely out of control.
You're trying to medicate the pain and numb yourself from everything instead of facing it. I mean, you have to admit that's a lot easier than facing it.
Well, it seems that way, but in the long run, it isn't easier, right? And it's just that
Right.
initially it seems that it works. If we wouldn't keep going, look, if alcohol didn't make me feel better the first time, I might not have kept pursuing it at the level, right? I mean, it seems to work in the beginning, but for me, it became its own problem, and it became sort of the precursor problem that had to be addressed before I could even start to heal everything else that it was covering up.
Right. Sounds like you had a couple lucky calls. You've been pulled over because you always had meth on you, but they never searched you.
Yeah, I mean, I had one arrest when I was 18. And so when I was 18, right after high school, I was arrested for hypodermics and meth. And I was treated really lightly. I mean, I lived in a small town, so they knew I didn't have like even a juvenile record. Even if it would have been sealed, they would know. It's a small town. They would know, but also, sort of white working class girl. I had good grades. I was getting to go to college. And so they actually reduced my charges from a felony down to a disorderly person, which isn't even a misdemeanor. It's below that. And they gave me just probation, and they let me leave for college the next year. And they also gave me the right to expunge my record if I wasn't arrested in 5 years. So that was really treated lightly, which doesn't happen to everyone. But you're right. The last 10 years of my meth use, I had meth on me every day. And I was pulled over for tickets or minor accidents, and I was never searched. And I was well aware how, that was part of being a white woman in a middle class, sort of low crime area, that they weren't sort of looking for somebody to be using drugs. And I knew that if I were a person of color or in a different type of community, that probably I would have had a much longer criminal record. So that was really important for me, so that when I got sober, I had less to sort of overcome. I didn't have to have that extra challenge that a lot of people walk into recovery with.
Right. So you applied to get your law license at 42.
Yeah. So, I mean, I grew up in Central Jersey, and I came to California, and I graduated from Berkeley at undergrad. And I actually went to law school right after I graduated in the fall, but I started using meth again, seriously, like daily, in January of my senior year of college. So by the time I got to law school in the fall, I was in no shape to do it. Like I got accepted to Berkeley Law. This is a top 10 law school, and I gave it back. Like I withdrew and I gave it back because I couldn't get there. And if I was there, I couldn't concentrate or do the work because of my addiction. And that was like a horrible, painful loss. Like I hated driving by that building. It was awful. And so then when I got sober, I'm 32. I have my Berkeley degree and actually good grades, but a really horrible, embarrassing resume. And so I had to sort of start from where I was. But I did work my way back to law school at 6.5 years sober. I went to law school for real, like I actually went to law school. And I was 39. And when I graduated, it was 3 years later, and I was 42. So yeah, that was the new career, the sort of my sobriety career was primarily that, and it was a great joy to get that back after having lost it. But it was I felt old when I got sober at 32, and I certainly felt a little behind the ball. You have that I want to make up for lost time feeling, but I wasn't ready for law school the first year or the second year or the third year. It was 6.5 years sober when I went to law school for real.
I just think that's so important because they're probably like, oh, what would you do? Go back when you were like 24? You know what I mean? When we're saying it doesn't matter where you came from. No, she was late 30s, early 40s, and still was able to become a judge. I mean, that is like mind-blowing and so inspirational.
Yeah. And that's part of what, that's what I try to use this story for. But I will say, I mean, one of the things I talk with newcomers about is making an honest assessment, not just about what job you could get. Because even if I had wanted a career job when I got sober, nobody was going to hire me for that. I had a terrible resume. My last job before I went to rehab was word processing, and I held it for 9 months. Okay. I had a Berkeley degree and good grades, and I could not even hang on to a word processing job. But even if I would have been offered it, which nobody was going to offer me. I wasn't ready for a career job. Like I just wasn't. And so I had to be realistic about what I could handle. And so my first job out of rehab was a part-time, temporary, low-level admin job. Because honestly, for me to get up every day and go to work on time, okay, and stay all the hours that I was supposed to be there and do a good job and do it the next day and the next. I was 32 and had never done that in my life. Like I really needed to sort of get that habit and that practice. And so that's how I started. And then my second job was a full-time mid-level administrative job, and I got a promotion. And then at 6.5 years, I went to law school. So it was hard because I felt old. I felt like I wanted to sort of catch up for lost time, but at the same time, I wasn't ready to leap ahead. And sometimes we get into trouble in recovery when we try to race forward too fast. So it was hard to be realistic. It was hard to be patient. It was hard to accept where I was, but it was really important. And it set me up, I think, for success because I did what I was ready for. Therefore, I succeeded at what I was doing, which sort of built up my strengths and my confidence and my skills. And then I was ready for step 2.
That's great. At least you knew that because, mine's a little different, clearly. Like out of high school, I went to community college. I was not ready. And you know what I did? I sat and ate pretzels and drank Sprite on the bench. And it was like, what am I doing here? Like, this isn't helping anybody. So you have to know when you're ready and don't force it because it's usually not going to work out the way that you had planned.
Exactly right. I think and it's also, I think, important in all areas, right? I mean, it wasn't just professionally. I mean, I wasn't ready for a lot of things. Like when I got home from rehab, I made a list of all the things I needed to work on. And believe me, it turns out it was not all the things I needed to work on, as I found out. But it was a really long list and there was no way for me to tackle all those things. So another part of it for me was really thinking about, okay, what are my priorities? Because I cannot start working on these 22 things, right? I mean, it's impossible. And so I picked 5 things. I picked sobriety. I knew I had to start working on my trauma, that I needed to get professional help for that right away. Professionally, to start working again. My relationship with my partner, because he was ready to throw me out, was one of the many reasons I went to rehab. And then starting to get my debt under control. And honestly, that was my list. Everything else really had to sort of wait. And I think that was one of the also good techniques was to really sit down and say, what are my top priorities? What is it? How much can I actually even start to tackle at this point in time?
Oh, for sure. I do that now. Like to-do lists. Oh my God. They are like my favorite thing now. I'm like, this is how, you're getting older. So I'm like, oh, to-do list. Like, yeah. But it holds me accountable. And then like when you cross something off, it feels so good. But I too had to prioritize because my list could be this. And it's like, you are not going to finish this long list. Like, you have to be intentional and you have to, it's prioritize. It's so important.
Yeah. And you're right. It's in the small things like the to-do list, but it's in the big areas as well. And I think it's also important. So what I really thought about was, okay, so here's my 5, right? Like what's my first goal for each of those 5? And then what's my first plan to reach that first goal for each of those 5? And then that's what I focused on. And then when you hit the first goal, then it's like, okay, so what's my second goal in this area? And what's my plan for that? And then eventually it was like, okay, now I can actually start to tackle 1 or 2 other things on the list. So which one of those other 2 things am I going to add? It's that sort of iterative process. But you're exactly right. That's not just a sobriety technique. That works for all of life, right? And so it really helped me. It helped me start to trust myself again, to trust my judgment, to trust that I could be disciplined, to trust that I could not be perfect, because none of us are perfect in sobriety, but that mostly I could make right decisions. Mostly I would be able to do what I said and carry out. And that was really important for me to learn because I had forgotten that I could do that. Like I just had lost that connection to myself as a sort of responsible, disciplined, analytical, goal setting plan maker. Mary Beth was lost, and I needed to reconnect to her so that I could handle everything.
Right. Did you allow yourself rewards when you would cross something off?
I mean, I definitely did. So for me, with my trauma, the way it showed up for me, and it turned out I had PTSD, which I didn't know. Today we would call it complex PTSD because it went on for such a long time and it was so varied. But for me, that showed up as severe anxiety. So my natural inclination was always to see the negative and to catastrophize. So I literally, in my recovery, I had to force myself to pause every once in a while and look back and see what I had actually accomplished. Because if I didn't make myself do it, all I would see would be my mistakes and my imperfections and what I shoulda, woulda, coulda had or shoulda, woulda been doing. I had to make myself pause and say, well, actually, in 3 months or 6 months or a year, you've actually made a lot of progress. Like notice that, be proud of that. And that helped me. It helped release some of my anxiety. It helped me notice the progress. And it made me see that I was sort of like not topped out on the progress. You know what I mean? Like I was still on the uphill climb, and that helped. But it was not my natural inclination. I had to force myself to do it.
Well, it's important. You have to like celebrate milestones and just little achievements because it's what's going to help you keep going. Because a lot of this is hard work. When you're working on yourself, there's a reason why you hid behind all that other stuff. So now you're like taking the layers apart and you're like, shit, this is scary.
It is scary and it is hard work. And I think part of it also is that it gives you hope, right? Like for me, when I went into rehab, I didn't actually think I could get sober. It wasn't that I wanted to keep using. It was that I didn't think that was on the table for me. I was trying to figure out how to do better, how to use less, so things would be less chaotic. But the techniques that you're talking about can actually they can help you feel hopeful that your future could be good. And because it's hard work, having that hope, I think, helps us get through the struggles of that hard work, right? If you have some hope that you actually can succeed, that you can make positive progress, that helps you get through the times where you're struggling or things don't go the way you want or something sort of hits you sideways that you didn't have any control over or didn't expect. And so to me, it's all tied together in that way.
Absolutely. What kind of therapies helped you with your trauma?
So when I got home, I did know that, I would have said abuse then. I use the word trauma now, but at the time I would say I got to deal with my abuse. And so I did look for a therapist who had expertise in that area. And she had a little bit of addiction expertise. And so I did individual therapy at first. And then I was also later on meds for a couple of years for my anxiety, which helped. But at 3 years, and a lot of what she did for me was sort of cognitive behavioral techniques. Like part of, for me, what was important was challenging my own negative thinking. Like, is my fear proportional to the actual risk of something happening? Or, and why is spinning and going over it 58 times, in a week actually helping me? Is it changing anything? Is it just making me, crazy? So I really had to learn how to challenge my own thoughts and my own perceptions. But then at 3 years, she put me into group therapy with women who had trauma histories. And that was a real eye opener for me. It was like a new step forward because they were connecting their current reactions and their current behaviors and feelings back to their trauma in ways I hadn't yet connected. And so they were sort of like ahead of me in the healing. And so when I saw them do that, it helped me understand it better. And once I had an idea about what was really going on, it made it, I was able to sort of more efficiently start to tackle it at a new level. So it was a progression of different therapies that really helped me in the long run.
I think group therapy is great because number one, now you're not alone. Because for the most part, we're always like, I am the only person on this planet that is fucked up. You know what I mean? It's like, no, or. And not only that, but yeah, you get to hear other people's situations, and then you can identify, see how they've processed it, and it gives you ideas that you had no clue about.
Right. Exactly right.
Have you tried any, like, do you still go to therapy or try any of the new modalities that are out nowadays?
No, I mean, I know a lot of people that have success, like with EMDR, and I know people are starting to use some, psychedelics under guidance, and for some people that's helping. But I did. So I will say this. First of all, it took me a lot less time to get my substance use disorder under control than it did for me to get my mental health to like the, let's say, 80th percentile of recovered. I did a lot of hard work on my substance recovery for the first year and a half to 2 years, even up to 2.5. But really at that point, I never really struggled with substances again. But it took me about 8 years of therapy to get to the point where I consider myself sort of 80% recovered. And by now I say I'm 92 to 95% recovered, depending on the day. So I still have the episodes occasionally, but it's much harder to trigger me. And when I'm triggered, it doesn't last nearly as long and it's not as intense. I mean, I might get spun for a day or two. I'm not going to get spun for weeks over the same thing. And it doesn't happen that often. So it was definitely, and I don't want to scare anybody who's dealing with trauma. It's not 8 years and light switch 80%. It's, better, right? It's a gradual improvement over time. But it was the trauma recovery was more complicated and it came first. And so it took a lot of time to get that, get to a point where I really feel like it's pretty manageable now.
Something I say in probably almost every episode is you're still going to have bad days. You're never going to be 100%. You're going to have good days. You're going to have bad days. Things are going to happen. So you can't knock yourself down for when you have a bad day. Just the next day, wake up, try to be better. It's okay.
That's true. It took me a while to understand that other people, these things happened. They just didn't happen at the sort of the level that they happened to me. Like I sort of thought like other people were just like swimming through life, emotionally. And that's not, you're right. That's not really true. But it is a lot of hard work. And the thing is that so many of us that come in with a substance use disorder also have some other mental health condition going on. It's very, very common. The data I've seen is 55 to 75% of people with an addiction have another mental health condition in addition to substance use disorder, which is a mental health condition. We got to, keep that in mind. And so that today they call it, dual diagnosis or co-occurring disorder. When I got sober, they actually didn't want us to deal with our mental health for 6 months until we were sober that long, but that is the wrong answer. So today they emphasize that if you're going in for substance treatment, you should be evaluated for other mental health conditions right away so that you can be at the same simultaneously and from the beginning attacking both. And the way I think about it is that it's hard to maintain sobriety if your mental health is out of control. And if you have an addiction, it's hard to get your mental health under control, if not impossible, if you're still in active addiction. Like I went to therapy when I was still using, and I could never make any progress, because the drugs are like a wall between me and myself. I didn't even really know what I was feeling or really understand my own history. And so I had to be sober to properly address my trauma, my PTSD, my anxiety.
You would think, so they didn't like go into trauma at all when you were in rehab.
We had like a teeny bit of therapy, but like they wouldn't medicate people, for example, at all, because they said you had to have the drugs out of your system for 90 days to 6 months. And they wouldn't even diagnose us. They wouldn't admit that we had a diagnosis because they said, we can't tell if you're coming off drugs or if it's real, And so no, they didn't do much at that time. But today, if you have both, you should be looking at a program that's going to handle co-occurring disorders, because some people do need to be medicated from the beginning, even when they are newly sober, even if they have to address it later. But certainly therapy for whatever mental health condition you have is recommended from the start.
I mean, most people use because of trauma. It's what they picked up. It's what helped them cope. So you would think, yeah, it goes hand in hand. You have to realize, why are you wanting to use in the first place?
That's right. I mean, so, and sometimes people use to try to manage their mental health symptoms, right? They're trying to manage their depression, or they're trying to manage their anxiety, and they're using illicit drugs to try to do that, which usually isn't the best solution. But the other
Not
thing is,
gonna work.
your addiction can cause mental health conditions. So being in active addiction, for example, can cause new traumas, like being homeless, or you're in dangerous situations. Maybe you have more sexual assaults, or there's just more violence, or just danger. But also, some drugs can create mental health conditions. I mean, you can, meth, for example, can give you psychosis when you're using meth. But for some people, even when they're sober, that psychosis doesn't completely go away, or it doesn't go away for a long time. And then alcohol also can create some cognitive and other, mental problems. So it can go both ways. The mental health can come first before the addiction, and sometimes you can develop mental health conditions because of your addiction.
Well, some of the drugs eat your brain, so your brain doesn't know what's going on.
Yeah, but most of the time it will heal over time, right? I mean, I've seen like brain scans of people who were actively on meth, 30 days sober, 90 days sober, 6 months, a year, 2 years. And so over time, your brain starts to heal and look more normal. The other thing I do like to emphasize is we talk a lot about how the drugs rewire our brain, but the reality is that recovery rewires your brain too. So when you're making positive choices and you're doing sort of, the new positive behavior over and over and over, that rewires your brain. That's part of healing your brain. And so the good news is that the same process that can make us feel like we're stuck in a loop when we're using can also actually help us find our way forward.
Did you ever, being a judge, you were federal, but I mean, was there like big drug cases or anything that would come to your way? Like, did you kind of have a soft spot for those kind of people?
Yeah, so I was a federal administrative law judge, and there's all kinds of judges in different systems. But for me, I was actually a judge for Social Security. And so I did see a lot of people that were applying for disability benefits that had trauma histories, that had mental health conditions, that had substance use disorders, either active or in their past. And so I definitely saw people that had similar histories to mine. And so that was always really interesting. And it always just reminded me how easy it is to stay stuck. But a lot of times also what I saw with the people was they weren't getting focused help. A lot of them didn't have insurance, or they were homeless. And so they didn't have access to regular expert assistance in getting their conditions under control. And so that sort of helped them stay stuck.
Right. Stability is huge. Yes. Like, when you have a child, people are like, routines, you have to have your routine. You know what? That really never goes away, I don't think. Even when you're an adult, you need a routine.
Yeah. And I will say it was one of the advantages I had when I got sober, is that my partner, although he was like ready to throw me out, was making no promises of staying with me. He did let me come home after rehab to see sort of like, would I stop using drugs? Would I move forward? So I had a stable living situation, and that is an advantage that not everybody has. I'm also was in California, and even though I didn't have insurance, I could get state disability to help me pay for treatment. I was in a low cost, like I was in like a sort of a poverty-based treatment program. But in California, I actually had access to disability benefits because I had paid in, and not everybody in all states has that access as well. So I think sometimes we act like everybody who wants treatment can get treatment, and that's just not true. A lot of people don't have access because they don't have insurance, or they live in a place where there isn't treatment. Also, sometimes people, even if they could use inpatient treatment, they can't leave their job for 30 or 60 or 90 days, or leave their children. So there's a lot of barriers that we could do better at helping people with.
Oh, for sure. We need to take a huge look at what we're doing with mental health and all that.
Yes.
Because I work in the insurance industry, and I look at the benefits, and when clients are like schizophrenic, bipolar, and they don't want to pay, and it's like, you have to give these people the help that they need. Like, you make enough money. Like, just let them have it.
Yeah. And the truth is that most people can, they can improve. They can have decent lives if we give them the help that they need. It's just that we're just not set up for it. I mean, it's just like the whole thing with incarceration, right? We incarcerate so many people because they have an addiction. And often it's just for possession. It's not even for other crimes. It's possession. Well, it's very expensive to incarcerate people. You could treat 3 or 4 people for the price of incarcerating one. And so
Absolutely.
we're spending money in the wrong places, but yet we judge people with mental health conditions or substance use disorders. We judge them as if we've offered them all the help in the world and they're still not taking advantage of it. And that's often just not the real case.
No, absolutely. Right. I mean, the resources, they're just not there, especially in every state, every county, everything. So
Yes,
gotta,
yes. People have to fight to get what they need. I mean, that is one of the advantages of peer support, right? I mean, without any money, the one thing everybody can access is peer support, which, of course, is 12 steps, AA, NA, but it's also groups that I participate with, like Life Rings Secular Recovery, She Recovers Foundation, SMART, or Dharma, or Women for Sobriety. And so today, not only does peer support is free, and but also if 12 steps isn't a good fit, which it wasn't for me, the other groups, they all have in-person meetings, but if they're not in your town, you can participate online. So the good news for everybody is, at a minimum, everybody who wants to can access peer support, and that can be sometimes really people's lifeline to getting sober.
right. I mean, you have to have some kind of support. You got to have something in place.
Well, it helps a lot of people. I mean, about 20% of people that get sober actually do it on their own, which, I like it. But still, for the majority of people, having that support helps. And as you say, it's also tied to that example thing, just like group therapy, right? You're seeing people ahead of you in the process, and they can give you good ideas and suggestions, and they're just modeling what your life can be like if you can just find a way to get yourself out of the pit, the miserable pit that you're living in.
Right. So you're retired now, right?
Well, I am retired from my job as a judge, but so today I have my memoir out, which I mentioned, but I also write like opinion pieces for I've been in the Wall Street Journal and the LA Times and Recovery Today. I do a lot of speaking, not just podcasts, some television and radio, but I do a lot of speaking at conferences. I'll do like a keynote for a fundraiser for a recovery organization. I train lawyers and judges about substance use. So between all that, I try hard to keep it in the part-time box. But this is sort of, now that I'm retired, I can talk much more openly, right? I can talk about anything and say the whole truth without worrying about professional ramifications. So I feel like it's my time to be of service in a new way. And the truth is that judge title, it actually, what I use it for is to sort of get people's ears open. It helps people, I think, listen to me a little harder, so I get their attention. And then I can use that attention to share information I think it's important to share.
Absolutely. While you were still a judge, did you ever go into your past, or did you wait until you retired and then you're like, all right, you want to hear what I've been up to?
The only time I told them is when I joined the board for Life Rings Secular Recovery, and I was still a judge then. I had to run it through ethics, like it's an outside activity and you have to tell them what you're doing. But I wasn't specific. I didn't say I shot meth. I said, I think I had 23 years sober at the time. I have 30 now, by the way. I had 30 years of sobriety in January. But I said something like, I'm 20 years sober, which is the word I use, even though, it was meth. That's our modern terminology. And I just said, here's what Life Ring is. And I'm going to be on the board, and I'm going to be speaking and helping with this and that. And that was it. So my guess is that they assumed alcohol. And I didn't dissuade them of that. But that was the first time I told them, an employer, that I actually was in recovery.
Well, congratulations on your sobriety. That is amazing.
Yeah. I mean, 30 years is an important marker, but I do emphasize that going from 29 to 30, that's not the hard part. That's not the hard part. I mean, it's those first, 1 to 3 years for most of us. That's where we need to give our, really focused attention to getting our sobriety under control, possibly to dealing with other mental health disorders and just starting to rebuild our life. After that, most of us don't need to give it that same level of concentrated attention. But I'm proud. I mean, 30 years is a big milestone. It is a big milestone. But yeah, it's going from 29 to 30 really wasn't the challenge.
Well, I think you did amazing. I could only imagine. I mean, starting at the age of 12, you would only imagine that you probably wouldn't have made it to 20s, 30s, so you were lucky.
I was lucky. I mean, I had, several rapes. The last one was like 6 hours, 3 men. I really thought I was going to die. I had a violent boyfriend. I mean, I definitely, and just being around drug people and having overdose events, even with meth, luck was a factor. I also, when I got sober, I didn't have HIV, I didn't have Hep C, I didn't have any of the blood-borne diseases. Part of that was luck, but also part of it was that in the early 90s in San Francisco, which is near where I live, the needle exchanges started because of HIV. It wasn't legal, but San Francisco allowed it. And so twice a week, there would be, at a designated spot, we would all line up and the van would come and the police would just drive on by. So it was sort of a public health response. And so I do support things, harm reduction techniques like syringe services programs, as we call them today, to try to help keep people healthy. Because look, again, that was another challenge I didn't have in sobriety. I wasn't trying to get sober and I had HIV and I had endocarditis, right? I was relatively healthy once I started eating again and wasn't putting poison in my veins.
You got some sleep. I mean, yeah, you're going to use anyways. So you might as well try to be safe about it. Like I've even seen people I don't know if people still rave. I think they do. I don't know. But they used to set up tents where they would check your ecstasy and stuff to make sure it was safe to eat. They don't want you doing it, but they don't want you to die from doing it. So
Exactly. They have fentanyl test strips today. It doesn't tell you how much fentanyl is in something, but it tells you whether it's there or not. And there are more sophisticated machines that some communities have. But yeah, it is important we want people to stay alive. I look at harm reduction as twofold. One is, for a lot of people, that's part of their path to eventually getting sober, right? Like it can be a way to engage with the health community, people that are sort of interested in you, treating you with respect. All the syringe service programs, facilities have referrals to treatment, or they have other, information about housing or whatever. But also, even if you just never decide to get sober, you're still a human being, and we don't want you to suffer because you have the mental health condition of substance use disorder, right? We shouldn't want them to have the worst experience possible. We should try to keep them as healthy as we can. On top of which, the truth is, it's actually cheaper to provide harm reduction than for people to be going to the ER every 5 minutes and, or being hospitalized for a month because they have a bloodborne infection from shooting up. I mean, even if you only care about your tax dollars, harm reduction is going to save money. And more money will be better spent, and it'll reduce a lot of other costs.
I didn't even think about that. Like the cost if you got to be rushed to the hospital and have all that going on. Yeah, it's a lot more money.
It's a lot more money. That's right. It's a lot more money. And even things like, people talk about syringe services. Sometimes there's going to be dirty needles outside. It actually, the needles are there more if you're not using if you're not using inside or in a safe way, or if you're not turning your needles into the syringe services program. So some of the fears are about things that are actually worse if we don't do it.
That's the truth.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men?
Turn your dial to find the frequency of the past.
Captain Advice.
Where the classic stories of mysteries, sci-fi, thrillers, and suspense are found waiting to be heard once again.
Another case for Nick Carter, Master Detective.
You'll find a variety of those stories here, in their original form, where each episode takes you to another place or time.
The Man of Bronze, Doc Savage.
But only when you find the mystery frequency. Available everywhere.
The shadow knows.
So you won the Silver Award in 2023 for your book. So that is exciting.
Yeah, I will say so. So when I was appointed a judge, I started taking notes for the book, but I actually had never read a lot of memoir, and so I thought, well, maybe I ought to read more, So there was a couple things. One is I realized that my skills as a legal writer were that's not memoirs written like a novel. Like I really, oh my gosh, like I don't have these writing skills. I need to learn how to write like in scene and with emotion and the dialogue. And so I took classes to try to figure out how to write the best memoir that I could. So yeah, winning the nonfiction silver, and then also my other favorite thing was that the Librarians of America, they review books. If you can get them to review your book, they reviewed my book, and they said that it was a harrowing yet ultimately rewarding story. But my favorite part, the Librarians of America said it was page-turning prose. And that was my favorite part because I worked hard. It's not just about telling the story. It's not just about the story itself. It's about how do you shape the story and how do you help the reader connect to you emotionally and really understand what was going on for you and all of those things. So writing a memoir, for me, it was like an intellectual challenge, which I enjoy. And yeah, those were my two favorite kudos, the Librarian and the Silver Award.
Very good. If somebody wanted to purchase, I'm guessing probably Amazon. Everything's on Amazon.
Yeah. So again, it's From Junkie to Judge, One Woman's Triumph Over Trauma and Addiction, of which I will say 30% of my book is about recovery. So it's a lot of it is about how I built a personal and individual plan, but also about that trauma substance use recovery overlap. But it's on Amazon. It's on all the usual sites. Your bookstores either have it or can get it. And then the other thing I'll throw out is that if anyone wants to reach out to me, my website is junkietoJudge.com. And you can read like my op-eds, like the Wall Street Journal op-ed and all are there. But you can also message me. And then there's Twitter. And I will say, I do not argue with people on Twitter. Okay. But what I do on Twitter is I post the new studies that come out about recovery or substance use. I post articles, opinion pieces, and just my recovery thoughts. And that's at MaryBethO_.
No, that's great. Anybody who sees it, sometimes stats, they turn people's heads. They make you think. So I think it's important that we share that kind of stuff because a lot of us don't know all that.
Yeah. I mean, I will say when I started speaking, I felt like, well, I really need to make sure I'm current, on what, because a lot of things have changed in my 30 years of sobriety. Like there's a lot deeper understanding. We have a lot more science around substance use and recovery than we used to. So some of the things they told me when I got sober actually weren't true at the time. Like they told me there was only 12 steps, which wasn't true. And it wasn't, the right fit for me. I found alternatives, but some of the things they told me they thought were true then, but it turns out that they're not true. And so one big example of that is that when I got sober, what they said was that we didn't know what day it was, but one day we crossed this like invisible line from drug abuser to drug addict. And that, and that was the way that conceptually we were taught to think. But that's not the way that we look at it today. Today, it's like all other mental health disorders. It's on a spectrum, right? You can have a mild, moderate, or severe substance use disorder. And what treatment you need can depend on where you fall on that mild, moderate, or severe spectrum. But also, it's also related to that idea of the old idea that you have to have some horrible bottom before you're going to get sober. Well, it turns out the data shows that's not true. And also, people die waiting for horrible bottoms. And so today we encourage people to get help at the mild or moderate level. Don't wait, until it's horrible. On today's scale, I would be at the very severe end because it was shooting meth for a long time. And I got sober. You can, but it's so much better to try to get it under control at an earlier part of the process. And so those are just like a couple of the new ways of thinking. So I do try to stay up on the new studies that are coming out, the new ideas, the new expert opinions about how to think about things, because it is evolving, it's evolving.
Oh yeah, things change like every 5 minutes, so you just never know.
True.
I'll make sure I put all links down in the show notes, so if anybody does want to get a hold of you, they'll know where to look. And I guess before we close, was there anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I mean, I appreciate, the conversation and the opportunity to talk. I do hope people find some reassurance, and also for friends and family, right? Not just the person still struggling, but I know when you have your family member and they're 30 and they're still, not getting sober, that can be very terrifying. And so, I got sober at 32. It wasn't young. It wasn't quick. It wasn't early. And so part of it is to help reassure the friends and family that however bad their family member is, that doesn't mean to give up hope. That doesn't mean they still can't find a path out.
Absolutely. And there's the support groups for families that are trying to at least get on a level to understand why their loved one is the way they are.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the other thing. So, that whole tough love idea, that's like old. So today for friends and family, it's craft, right? Community reinforcement and family training. There's a great book for craft. It's called Beyond Addiction. And you're right, it educates friends and family. Like, what is substance use disorder really? Why is it so hard to change? But also, what positive reinforcement techniques can they use to sort of help move the ball forward? So there's a lot more options. And also for friends and family, it used to just be Al-Anon, the 12-step version of friends and family support. But now Lifering has friends and family, SMART has friends and family, Hazelden, others. And so friends and family have support group choice today too, just like the person with the addiction has support group choice.
Yeah, it's out there. Find it. You're not alone. So get the help you need for sure.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for being here, Mary Beth. I really appreciate it. I love this conversation.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here as well.
Awesome. I think we all know somebody who can benefit from this episode. Please make sure to share it with them. And thank you guys so much for listening to my podcast. This really means a lot to me. If one of my episodes has helped you in any way, I would really like to know. It's important for me to know that the work that I'm doing is actually helping people. If you want more of me, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow me on Instagram and TikTok. If you or anyone you know is in need of national hotlines, please go to truecrimeconnections.com. I have all the phone numbers there listed for anything that you could possibly imagine. All right, my Renowned Roots community, keep building hope and gaining strength. Until next time.